Hello and welcome back to day 2 of the 2013 citizen hearing on UAP. We've just heard about the Rendlesham Forest incident, and in this one we're going to hear about the relationship between UAP and nuclear weapons. This is an incredibly important part of ufology, and something which, if you look here, I've already done a documentary on, but there are numerous books, podcasts and things talking about this. Anybody well versed in ufology has probably heard of Captain Robert Salas, who was the primary witness to the Malmstrom Air Force Base incident, where 10 Minuteman missiles were switched off by a 30-foot red orb. But you're also going to hear testimony from 2 other of his colleagues, which were inspired by his bravery in coming forward to come forward with their own stories. It's incredibly moving. You hear in one of the testimonies, one gentleman who had that experience hadn't been able to tell his own wife until he heard Salas talk about it and the issue come out into the public, and the relief is palpable. I can't stress enough how high pressure, the immense level of trust that these gentlemen had during their careers. With one turn of a key and the input of one little code, they could have brought Armageddon to the entire planet. So you can imagine the caliber of people involved with that responsibility. As Jesse Michaels says, if these guys get a headache and have to take a paracetamol, they have to call it in and report it to people. Such is the level of strict guidance and surveillance that they were under all the time. So, for them to come forward and talk about experiences like these should not be taken with anything other than the highest level of respect. Anyway, I've waffled enough. I hope you really enjoy it. I found this one fascinating, and I'll see you for the next session.
I'd like to call the afternoon session of our citizens hearing on disclosure to order.
Gentlemen, if you would rise and repeat after me, I'd appreciate it. I do hereby affirm that I will tell the truth and nothing but the truth to this committee today. Thank you very much.
We'll begin with Captain Roger Salas. Am I pronouncing that right, sir?
Salas is correct. Thank you, Ms. Kilpatrick and panel. I would first like to briefly describe the incident that I experienced in March 1967. At that time, I was a first lieutenant, U.S. Air Force, stationed at Malmstrom Air Force Base, Montana. I was trained and assigned duties as a missile launch officer for the Minuteman I intercontinental ballistic missile. I was designated Deputy Missile Combat Crew Commander and part of a 2-man crew. My commander at that time was Lieutenant Frederick Meiwald. He's now deceased. I will briefly review the diagrams showing the Launch Control Center, launch facility. We will show you shortly when one of the other speakers present. We were on duty inside the Oscar Launch Control Center, a concrete capsule located about 60 feet underground. We had operational control over 10 Minuteman nuclear missiles. Each missile operates independently and has its own source of primary and backup power systems. It is important for you to note that the command and control for these missiles was entirely located within the capsule. There was absolutely no means to affect any of the missile systems from outside the capsule. On the evening of March 24, 1967, while my commander was on a scheduled rest break, I received the first of 2 phone calls from my topside flight security controller, FSC. The first call was to report unidentified lighted objects flying above the facility. They reported they were flying at very high speeds, making very odd maneuvers, nothing an aircraft could do, and they just wanted to report it. I didn't pay much attention to that first call, and I basically hung up on them. Minutes later, the FSC phoned again and reported in a very agitated state that there was a large oval-shaped object hovering above the front gate. It was a red, pulsating, lighted object, approximately 30, 40 feet in diameter. The best he could describe it. It was difficult to distinguish a structural part of it on the inside, except that it was glowing red, pulsating object. He had all the men out there with their weapons drawn. He wanted me to tell him what to do next. I, of course, told him something like, make sure nothing comes inside the perimeter fence. Of course, our primary duty was to secure those nuclear missiles. Immediately after that call, I started to inform my commander about the incident. As I started to inform my commander, our missiles began to shut down. We lost alert status on all 10 missiles while this object was above our facility. When we queried the fault system, all missiles reported guidance and control system failure. We had a way of querying faults within the system called VERSA. It's a voice-activated system, and we're getting channels 9 and 12, which is guidance and control system. At the same time, we had indicator lights showing security violations at 2 of the launch facilities where the missiles were physically located. While Lieutenant Mywald reported the incident to the wing command post, I phoned upstairs and directed the security alert team to be sent to those launch facilities with security violations to investigate those indications. At that time, the FSC reported to me that the object had flown off at high speed. When the security alert team arrived at the affected LFs, and I'll brief LFs meaning launch facilities, they reported seeing the object hovering over those sites. As they approached closer to the object, they lost all communications with the FSC. After speaking to the wing command post, Lieutenant Mywald informed me that the same thing happened at another flight. At that time, I assumed that meant that night, but it turns out what he meant was it happened at another flight about a week earlier, and that's the Echo flight incident, which I'll talk about shortly. Right now, I'd like you to hear the portion of the conversation I had with Colonel Mywald, who retired as a full colonel, and I had this conversation sometime in 1996. Can we play the first audio, please?
Back and forth in the base, and he was because they were doing maintenance on, I don't know, the guidance cans or something, and the maintenance crews were staying over, and there were security and maintenance on site on both, on 2 of the 10 sites. And when the first one went down, I talked to the security out there. They had reported this UFO hovering over the site, and I said, "Yeah, right. What are you guys drinking out there?" And we struck strike teams to both of the sites that had been occupied. And both strike teams, I didn't tell them what we had heard via the LF radio, and I told them to go to get within a mile of the site and call back in on the VHF. And they both had reported it too. So we had 2 maintenance crews, 2 security troops on site, and 2 strike teams all reporting it.
Is that right?
Yep.
Do you remember any of the names of any of those guys?
Nope.
You don't?
Sorry, there's a little mix-up there. That was Colonel Walter Fiegel, who was the Deputy Missile Crew Commander at Echo Flight. Can we have the Mywald audio, please?
Any reports from their field about UFOs?
So I remember the 2 guards that had gone out to one of the sites. Finally got back scared to death. We had to relieve them of duty.
Yeah. Oh, you mean our guards?
Yeah,
Oh, I didn't know that.
yeah, and rhythm control type.
Oh, I see.
They had gone out to one of the sites, one of the LFs, and on the way back, they lost radio contact, and we ended up having to send them back to base earlier. I'm not sure what happened. I don't think they ever returned to guard duty.
And what were they scared about?
Well, they had seen some crazy things. Then
Oh, they did?
yeah,
They reported that to you?
they reported it to the topside guy.
Oh, the topside guy, that's right, okay. Okay. Okay, well, interesting, don't you think?
Yeah,
After we were relieved by another crew the next morning, I arrived back at base.
Mr. Salas?
Yes.
In a couple sentences, would you tell us what we just heard? The conversation.
Yeah, I'm sorry, it was a little confusing. The first conversation you heard was Colonel Walter Fiegel, now retired. As far as I know, he's still alive. He's authorized me to use that audio, by the way. It was a recording of a telephone conversation I had with him in 1996. And he described the fact that he had, on 2 of his launch facilities, he had maintenance crews out there and security guards. And when the first missile went down in his flight, they reported that there were UFOs overhead as the missiles went down. He lost all 10 of his missiles in rapid succession. That incident occurred on March 16th, 1967.
He launched them and they went down?
No, the missiles were not launched. He just reported, they reported that the objects were above them, and at that point the missiles started shutting down. Yeah, disabled. The second audio recording you heard was that of Colonel Mywald talking about the fact that we had security light violations and we had to send guards out to one or more of the LFs. And they reported seeing the UFOs again. By the way, I've got more audio available that's where Colonel Mywald supports my entire statement about what occurred. So he was consistent on supporting this for up until the time he passed away last year. After we received relieved by another crew the next morning, right back to the base, we reported to the squadron commander's office. There we were ordered to sign non-disclosure statements regarding our specific incident. I did sign a non-disclosure statement. And we were ordered not to talk to anybody about this. It was then designated a highly classified incident. At no time did we lose power during the incident. I want to emphasize, we always had electrical power. The sensitive information network, SIN cables that carried the signals to the missile systems were triply shielded from electromagnetic interference. The preliminary investigation isolated the failure to the logic coupler at each missile. The logic coupler is associated with the missile guidance system. That's about the best I can explain to you what the logic coupler does. I'll refer you to a portion of the unit wing history. I believe you have documents that I supplied you with that talk about the Echo flight incident, and I'll just read part of it. It says, in the opinion of the team, was that externally generated signals caused the generation of these 2 channels and shut down the launch facilities. The possibility of this is very remote due to the fact that all 10 couplers would have to fail in the flight within a few seconds of each other. This statement confirms that signals were sent to each individual missile separately in order to disable them. From my knowledge of the operating system at the time, neither I nor the investigative team could define the method or means by which these signals were sent to disable the missiles, each in the same manner, meaning each missile failed for the same reason, guidance and control system failure. Mr. Robert Kaminsky was the Boeing team leader for the investigation of the Echo flight shutdown. In a response to our inquiry, he stated, "This kind of event is virtually impossible once the system was up and running. The team met with me to report their findings, and it was decided that the final report would have nothing significant in it to explain what happened at Echo flight."
Just one moment, Captain. We did not explain that, just working with my congressional research assistant on the end of the table, we are going to allow 10 minutes for each of you. I'm not sure, I just got the time sign for the captain, and I don't believe that he's been talking 10 minutes, has he? He has been talking 10 minutes. Captain, can you, and since we didn't let you know ahead of time, I'm going to give you additional 3 minutes, if that's okay.
Thank you very much. I'll
You're
try to
very
get
welcome.
through it as quickly as
That's
I
okay.
can. After meeting with the engineers to discuss the results of their investigation, Mr. Kaminsky was notified by his supervisor that he should not submit his final report because the incident was reported to be a UFO event. Even though the Boeing company was the principal contractor for the Minuteman I missile, the report on the incident was not submitted by specific request to the Air Force. However, the Air Force did perform their own classified investigation where they identified a possible failure mode as stated above. In my opinion, we did not have the technical capability to produce a machine then or now that would be able to instigate the failure mode of these missiles identified in the unit wing history. In addition, the unidentified objects displayed the physical and flight characteristics that no known aircraft type could achieve then or now. Therefore, I have concluded these objects were non-terrestrial in origin. Of an important related activity ongoing, and this is important, on December 17, 1969, the official U.S. Air Force investigation into the UFO phenomenon was terminated. The principal basis for this, and you have the Air Force position on UFOs, I believe. I've given you a copy of that. The principal basis for this was termination was the evaluation of a report prepared by the University of Colorado entitled Scientific Study of Unidentified Flying Objects. In 1966, the U.S. Air Force awarded a $500,000 contract to the University of Colorado for the purpose of studying the UFO phenomenon. I'll refer to this study as the Condon investigation, or its team leader, Edward Condon. In fact, it was never intended to be a scientific study because the Air Force did not propose that any scientific hypothesis regarding the phenomena be evaluated. The Condon team relied on input and evaluations of reported UFO incidents from Air Force officers at various bases. The Condon team was, except for one individual, not authorized to review classified reports of Air Force incidents regarding the phenomenon. They were not even informed that classified UFO files existed until after the termination of their study. I have evidence supporting this. With respect to the 1967 Echo and Oscar flight UFO incidents, there was a deliberate effort to keep information about those incidents from the Condon Committee. In 1967, Dr. Roy Craig, the chief investigator for the Condon Committee, was informed by Mr. Raymond Fowler, a contractor working for Sylvania on Minuteman Electrical Systems, that the Echo flight shutdowns at Malmstrom had occurred during a UFO sighting. In October '67, he visited Malmstrom to inquire about this. Dr. Craig recalls this inquiry with Lieutenant Colonel Lewis Chase, the base operations officer at Malmstrom. After Colonel Chase and I had exchanged pleasantries in his office, this is a quotation, I asked him about the Echo incident. The colonel caught his breath and expressed surprise that I knew of it. I can't talk about that, he said. Colonel Chase had assured me that the incident had not involved a UFO. Since Colonel Chase was the last man I would doubt, when he conveyed this information, I accepted the information as factual and turned the review over to Bob Lowe, who had received, Robert Lowe was the deputy condon, and he was the only one cleared to look at classified information. When Dr. Robert Lowe, the deputy condon, requested the Air Force allow him to review the secret report of the Echo incident, he was informed that the report would be too highly classified to allow that review. Dr. Craig did not interview any of the many witnesses that were named to him by Ray Fowler that he could have interviewed. He did not interview either of the crews, Echo or Oscar crew. In addition, the Air Force Office of Project Blue Book was deliberately misinformed about these incidents. In a letter from Colonel James Minot, and I think you have these letters in front of you, he was right pat, Blue Book essentially. He requested Colonel Chase in June of '67, inquired of reports they had received that there were equipment malfunctions and abnormalities during the UFO sightings. The written reply from Colonel Chase stated, this office has no knowledge of equipment malfunctions and abnormalities in equipment during the period of UFO sightings. This evidence and the Air Force...
Captain, I think you just have a short piece to go, is that right? Just one page left.
Just very short.
Yes, sir. Please proceed.
I'm almost done.
Please proceed.
And by the way, this is a very complex case.
Absolutely, we can tell that. Yes, sir. Thank you, and we appreciate your testimony.
This is evidence that the Air Force purposefully denied the Con investigators the knowledge that the Echo and Oscar flight shutdowns were UFO-related incidents. Since the Air Force cites this particular study as the primary reason for the official rejection of the UFO phenomenon, and claims that no UFO reported, investigated, and evaluated by the Air Force was ever an indication of threat to our national security. And in light of my own experience and others, I must conclude the U.S. Air Force was and is engaged in lying and disinforming the public about the realities of the UFO phenomenon. That's the end of my statement.
Thank you. Thank you.
Very briefly, I just want to point out the fact that the next two witnesses that you will hear from, Mr. Schindele and Mr. Scott, this is the very first time they are going public, and I want to honor these guys for having the courage to do so. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Kathy. Mr. Schindele.
My name is David D. Schindele,
Schindele.
Captain, U.S. Air Force, retired. In 1966, I was involved in an incident while stationed at Minot Air Force Base, North Dakota. I was told to never speak of the incident again, and also told that as far as I was concerned, it never happened. Because of that, I am before you today with a bit of trepidation. I must say a lot of trepidation, as I have never before shown my face in person on this matter. I was a Minuteman ICBM launch control officer, a first lieutenant, and a deputy missile combat crew commander in a two-man launch crew with my crew commander who held the rank of captain. He was about 15 years older than I. I held a top secret clearance, which was required for my job. It all began one morning when I was watching TV while having breakfast, and I heard the local news announcer mention that some residents in the town of Mulhall, North Dakota, had seen strange lights overnight, which they attributed to a UFO. This caught my attention because I was scheduled for duty that morning at a launch control facility called November Flight, about 3 miles west of Mulhall and about 37 miles north of Minot, North Dakota. I lived in the town of Minot at the time, and I drove to the air base to attend the morning pre-departure crew briefing at wing headquarters, where all 15 missile crews would normally meet each day prior to pulling alert duty at their respective launch control facilities. During that pre-departure crew briefing, it was mentioned that some missiles at November Flight had gone off alert, but there was no further information provided. I immediately connected this to the news item that I heard earlier in the morning regarding a possible UFO sighting near the town of Mulhall. When the briefing was over, several of the launch crews seated near me commented about the news item, which they had also heard that morning. And there was speculation about a possible connection with November Flight. My crew commander had also heard the news item. And we were both anxious and quite curious about what we might find as we drove out to the launch control facility. If you could display my second slide. On this second slide, I don't believe you members have a picture of this, but you can see it on the screen here. This is the November Launch Control Facility from an air view from Google Earth. If you could show that again. There is an access road to the flight, to the facility from the north, coming down to the flight facility, where there's a main gate at the perimeter fence. The perimeter fence goes around the launch control facility building, top side, and there's a garage to the right of the main gate. The usual procedure upon arrival was to inspect the grounds and building, but this time my commander immediately went into the security section of the building to debrief security personnel and guards. The security center was the topmost north side of the building, near the main gate. I entered the facility from the back door at the end of the facility, and then encountered the site manager, a tech sergeant, who immediately took me into the day room and asked if I had been briefed on the previous night's events. I said I hadn't. We then proceeded toward the windows on the west side of the day room, where he described to me the large object with flashing lights that had been hovering just outside the fence that night. And he spread his arms out in front of him to indicate its size, the size of the object. Based on his description, I estimated the object may have been 80 to 100 feet wide, and approximately 100 feet from the building, maybe a bit closer. I immediately asked if it had been a helicopter, and he said that it just hovered with no noise being heard, quite unlike the usual noisy helicopters heard from within the building. I also asked what the flashing lights were like, but he could not answer. They were unlike any he had ever seen. They were not like the usual beacon lights on planes, but something like a pulsating glow. He then said the object, while hovering close to the ground, then glided to the right toward the north end of the building and out of sight. The object then came into view from the security section of the facility and hovered just behind and slightly to the right of the main gate, concealed partly by the large garage located within the fenced area to the right of the gate. As you can see there, the garage is labeled the second position of the object. This location put the object almost directly above the hardened launch control capsule, located 60 feet below ground. All our missiles, our 10 missiles, were located 4 to 14 miles away from the launch control facility. This capsule was located approximately underneath the garage. This was the launch crew quarters and the launch control center for all 10 interconnected nuclear-tipped missiles that were located away from the launch facility. Security personnel confirmed everything that the site manager had related to me. My commander and I then proceeded to take the elevator down to the launch control center, the capsule, to relieve the two-man officer crew below. After entering the capsule, our eyes were immediately transfixed on the launch control console, which showed that all missiles were off alert and unlaunchable. We had never seen such a thing before. The outgoing crew briefed us on the wild events that transpired overnight and indicated that the missiles malfunctioned at the time the object was hovering directly above the capsule and next to the main gate. We speculated on the possibility of an EMF pulse that might have created the situation. We had no doubt, however, that the 10 outlying nuclear-tipped missiles of November flight had been compromised, tampered with, and put out of commission by the object that had paid a visit. Normally, it's quite unusual to have even one missile down, except for maintenance. And Wing Headquarters was very proud of having more than 95% uptime for all 150 missiles of the wing. The following morning, after we had been relieved by the follow-on crew, we arrived topside, and I attempted to further query the flight security controller who had been on duty at the time of the situation. But he interrupted me, and he said that he had been instructed not to discuss the incident. That is when my commander then told me that he had received a call while I was on a scheduled rest break down below, and he was told that we were never to discuss the incident. When I asked where the directive came from, he said the OSI. He evidently received a call from the OSI. With no discussion allowed on the subject between him or me together or with anybody else, my crew commander and I were left in limbo and left on our own to conjure in our own minds how other situations might unfold and be handled. Normally, the Air Force would train us on all procedures. We were in a simulator constantly training. This serious lack of follow-through by the Air Force was more than bewildering, and it served to keep this situation on our minds. Together, there were a dozen of us involved with this incident. My commander and I were not there during the encounter, but we had to deal with the ramifications of the incident, and I'll never forget the frightened emotion on the faces of topside airmen who were gathered with me when I was briefed by the site manager. Besides those of us at the launch control facility, there had to be many more people involved with this, including maintenance people who had to retarget and reline the missiles, also additional security personnel to guard and protect the missile launch facilities, and who knows how many others on base were concerned. Everyone had been silenced. The incident was never discussed, and I never heard a word of any other incident from people that I associated with. I never spoke a word about my incident for almost 40 years, and my wife never knew. After several years of searching the internet in hopes of finding someone who would give me a clue about my incident.
Excuse me, Mr. Schindele.
Yes.
I yield you additional 2 minutes, excuse me.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I then found what was described by Captain Robert Salas, and I felt immediate, joyous freedom from my haunting memory. I then informed my wife. Since then, I have run across several missileers from my days at Minot who were there with me in the wing, and 2 of them have gone public with their own experiences. 2 others have described to me their unique experiences, but they have pleaded that I not divulge their names. They fear losing their Air Force pension, are losing their personal integrity and keeping a secret, or being ridiculed. I also know of 2 other officers involved in incidents, but they will not admit to their secret, probably for the same reasons. And then there's the late Captain Val Smith of my squadron, who is mentioned in official documents released by FIA. He was interviewed by the late Dr. Alan Hynek of Blue Book fame, who wrote an article in the Saturday Evening Post, published on 17 December 1966, which described the incident that Smith was involved with on 25th August 1966. Hynek stated in the article, "This incident was not picked up by the press. It's typical of the puzzling cases that I have studied during the 18 years that I've served as the Air Force's scientific consultant on the problem of UFOs." Display the 3rd slide, please. Just prior to release of this Post article, the Minot Daily News got wind of it and then published on 6 December 1966 a front-page news item with major bold headline that read, "Minot Launch Control Center saucer cited as one indication of outer space visitors." The front page. I remember this article. I thought, oh, maybe I could start talking. In 1966, when I was at Minot, the evidence was everywhere that something quite unique was happening. But I was embedded in a shell of silence. The Air Force knew the truth. The Air Force knew that I knew the truth. And that is the only reason they warned and instructed me that it never happened. Thank you.
And thank you, sir, for your courage today and for your service. Sergeant Scott.
Okay. I'm Tech Sergeant David Charles Scott, United States Air Force Security Police, retired. At the time of my sighting, I was an Airman First Class with a secret security clearance and was assigned to Alpha Flight, 91st Missile Security Squadron, Strategic Air Command, Minot Air Force Base, North Dakota. November 1974. It was after midnight when Airman Bill Gray, a member of my security alert team, and I were dispatched from Alpha 1 Launch Control Facility to an alarm situation at one of our 10 Minuteman nuclear missile sites. Probably just another jackrabbit setting off an outer zone alarm, we thought. As we drove there, Gray spotted a strange light in the night sky, called it to my attention. It appeared to be about the size of a stars in the sky, but was pulsating red. We checked the site and found everything secure. Gray said the strange light had gotten bigger and acted weird when I was below. Then we parked our vehicle off-site to await the alarm system to reset and the order which would allow us to leave the area. Now the strange light in the sky was pulsating and changing color in a sequence red, blue, and yellow. Suddenly our radio went dead and the idling engine of our vehicle quit. Gray and I sat there on guard duty for 45 minutes, protecting our missile site. We wondered aloud if the strange light above was a UFO. When the light changed to white and pulsated 3 times, and in quick succession, it disappeared and our engine came to life as the radio also came back on. As it did, Sergeant Hicks, our flight security controller, called and ordered us back to Alpha 1. All alarms had reset properly back at the missile site. We arrived back at Alpha 1 a little after 3 in the morning. We reported our story to Sergeant Hicks about the strange light. We wanted to convince him that we had not fallen asleep on duty or we weren't drunk. He said, "I believe you men." Then Sergeant Hicks hit us with a bombshell. All Minuteman nuclear missile site alarms in our wing had sounded simultaneously. Many security police and security alert teams reported seeing the strange lights, which Gray and I saw, and they too lost radio communication and vehicle power. "You know what I think?" Gray asked. "I think it was a UFO." Sergeant Hicks just nodded. I ventured, "Should we report it? Gray and I aren't lying. We'll write statements." Gray signaled his agreement with a nod. Sergeant Hicks said, "Why stir up a lot of trouble? The official Air Force position is that UFOs don't even exist. Let's just drop it unless you two want to get laughed out of this service." A few nights later, in the security police barracks back at Minot Air Force Base, I was listening to a news broadcast from Winnipeg, Canada radio station. The announcer read the story of an incident which had occurred just a few nights before, and fighter planes of the Canadian Air Force had scrambled to pursue the UFO. The fighters tracked it until it climbed at a steep angle and with blazing speed disappeared. The Canadians responded to the UFO that was over our missile site. When that strange light disappeared, the Canadians picked up on it because the reporter on the radio then stated the United States Air Force would release the report on this incident and it would be released in May of 1975. But the day came and went without official comment. And as far as I know, the U.S. Air Force has never officially recognized that event.
Complete, sir? You yield? Are you complete? Thank you very much, Sergeant Scott. Thank you. Very riveting, and thank you for your service as well. Now, Captain, I won't even try to pronounce your name. Please say it for us.
Fenstermacher.
You heard that? Can you just present?
Fenstermacher.
Fenstermacher. You're on, Captain. Thank you for coming.
Okay, thank you. If we have time, I have some pictures and graphics of the LCFs and the LFs and the LCCs. if we have time for it. It's not really pertinent, but I thought you might like a
We'd
little
like to
tour of the facilities.
You have them as a slide for paper or on our screen?
On the screen.
Okay, thank you.
I was a captain in the Air Force and a Minuteman III Combat Crew Commander from 1974 to 1977. I was stationed at F.E. Warren Air Force Base in Wyoming and assigned to the 400th Strategic Missile Squadron. Quite honestly, I was and still remain a skeptic, and at the time did not believe in this UFO phenomenon. In the fall of '76, my deputy and I were on duty at Romeo Launch Facility, or LCF. The LCF was the part of Romeo that was above the ground, as we saw with David Schindele. And the launch control capsule was the one that we took an elevator down to. It was located 60 feet below the ground and behind an 8-ton door, so we were pretty secure in there. In order to stay awake, my deputy and I were monitoring the VHF radio communication between our security alert team, which we friendly called the cops. David was one of them, David Scott, and between our flight security controller, FSC, our topside NCO. The SAT team was out doing their regularly routine checks. I think they were responding to one of those jackrabbits out one of our launch facilities. And so they were out and away. At approximately 2 a.m., the FSC called the SAT and said, "Hey, pull over. Get out of the vehicle and look around." That's all he said. Gave no direction or any guidance. A few seconds, and he also said, "See what you see." A few seconds later, they reported they saw nothing, and they said, "Oops, wait a minute, we do see something in the distance." The FSC, "Well, what do you see?" And they said in an excited voice, it was a light in the sky, it was a bright white pulsating light, and they could see some other colors in between the pulsations. The FSC asked them where the light was located, and the reply was that it was some distance to the north. And then after a pause, they said, "Geez, it really looks like it's near the LCF, or near where you are." The FSC then asked the SAT to return back to the launch control facility. My deputy and I kind of looked at each other and did a double take, because what the heck was that all about? So we called the FSC on our hotline and asked them what was going on. He very calmly said that right now, right above the LCF, there was a silent object with a very white pulsating light. Between the pulsations, he could see a red and blue. I asked for specifics, and his best guess, well, he said it was a fat cigar. It looked like a fat cigar. And his best guess was that it was 80 to 100 feet above the ground and 40 to 50 feet long. It was hard to see his perspective exactly, because he didn't know how close. If it was way high, it could have been 1,000 feet long. If it was way low, it could have been less. But that was his best guess. While we were talking, he reported that it was moving down the access road to the east, and very slowly and very quietly. I asked him to keep us updated. My deputy and I talked about what we should do with this information. In a few minutes, the FSC called back and said the object had stopped a few miles to the east and appeared to be above the closest launch facility, or LF. So we ordered the SAT team, who was now on their way back to the launch control facility, to go to that LF that had the object above it, and they said they had to return to the launch control facility for batteries for their flashlights. 10 minutes or so later, we asked the status of the SAT team, and we were told that they made it back to the LCF, but had departed yet. They were just about ready to go. The object moved further east along the access road above another LF. We again ordered the SAT team to that location, and they reported they had to first gas up their truck. It seemed to take them a long time before they appeared to be on their way. Shortly after the object went to the first launch facility, we reported the incident to our SAC command post at F.E. Warren, and the NCO that took the call laughed at us and said, "Call us back when that thing eats the SAT team," and hung up. As well as logging everything in the official log, my deputy and I, who each had prior service, meaning we were enlisted before we were an officer, we started taking personal notes. In addition to the official notes, we wanted to document everything that transpired. At our next hourly 400th SMS crew checks for the flights Papa, Quebec, Romeo, Sierra, and Tango, we told the other crew members what our object had done and received laughter and an attitude of general disbelief. What are you guys, crazy? Right after the group communication, the crew from Quebec called. They were the team we had dropped off on the way to Romeo and said that earlier that morning they had a similar object above a couple of their launch facilities. We asked what direction they were heading, and they said that they appeared to be heading towards me at Romeo. We asked what happened when they reported it, and they said, "Are you crazy? We didn't report it. We would have been laughed at." Well, he was right about that. They also mentioned that the SAT team that they had sent to one of the LFs had had an accident leaving the LF, and the Quebec crew seemed to find humor in that SAT accident. And that's important for what happens a few years later. We contacted the FE Warren SAC command post again, and several times, and reported, "Have you logged this yet?" They said no. I pushed it forward, got an officer in charge, and stated that if they didn't log this, if they didn't take this seriously, I was going to call the base commander. It was now 3 o'clock in the morning, and the base commander would have not liked getting awoken at 3 o'clock, but I would have. Then we got a call back from a senior NCO at the command post asking for more details, so they appeared to be logging it. The object moved to another LF, and the SAT team never made it to that one either. Our FSC kept us appraised of each movement and reported that at 4 a.m. approximately, it moved away very rapidly to a star-sized object and then disappeared. At no time did our missiles go offline, though. At no time did our missiles go offline. And I now understand why. Only recent information came out for that. Meanwhile, back in 1976, the next morning, we were relieved by another crew for our normal return to FE Warren, and when we went topside, we found the FSC curled up in a chair in kind of a fetal position. He had been relieved by the day FSC, but was not able to sleep and obviously was very distressed. The SAT members were conveniently not at the LCF. My deputy and I were both prior service and had a good rapport with our FSC, and we asked him about the difficulty that the SAT team had about going to the LFs. After making us promise that we would not report the SAT, he told us that in fact they never left the launch control facility, and they said they were not going to any LF that had that thing above it. So we picked up our crew member from Quebec, and we returned trip to FE Warren and discussed the excitement of that early morning hours. They insisted they would not report the incident, and that if we reported it, they would deny that it happened. If we reported their involvement in it, they would deny that it happened. Upon our return to our squadron, we reported the incident with our flight commander. And the next morning, we were called in by the commander of the 400th SMS. He asked us about the incident, and when he discovered we had personal notes, he asked to see them. Once in his hands, he tore them up and said we were never to talk about this again and required us to sign documents that I'm a little fuzzy about what they really said. We reluctantly signed them after going into a broom closet to talk about it for 10 minutes. At our next couple of departure meetings, an officer that we'd never seen before told us that this incident was classified and that officially never happened. And I always wanted to question which was it. Was it classified or it didn't happen? After a press conference in September 2010, I was given a name of a former Quebec SAT team that wanted to talk to me. I contacted and heard a story, and I'm confident he was one of the SAT members on duty that night at our incident Romeo. This is what he told me. As they approached the Quebec 9 in their vehicle, they saw a bright pulsating light with a beam of light extending down to the launch facility. While attempting to accomplishing one of their many checklists, SAC is known for their checklist, he actually reached into the beam. That spooked both of the SAT members, and they jumped in their truck, and as they raced away, they had an accident, and the truck was damaged. That tied into me that in fact was the Quebec team that was on duty the night when my Quebec commanders told me that their SAT team had an accident. So I was confident they were them. I asked, when they got back to F.E. Warren, they were ridiculed by the fellow SAT members. Someone even drew a drawing of them seeing a UFO, hitting a cow, drinking booze, and they were ridiculed for their time. And this guy was really, to this day, upset about that ridicule. I asked him to share his story with others and make a formal statement. He said, no, this is it. He was done, and he would not talk to anybody about this again, including me. And he, in fact, has not responded to any calls or emails from me. I kept silence about this 1976 incident. After all, a good officer follows his or her orders. I caught Larry King live on a Friday night on July 18th of 2008, and I came in at a segment, and I saw a former Air Force officer talking about a similar situation. I did not get the beginning of the segment, as I think I said. This guy's name was Bob Salas, and I thought he was one of the crew members from Quebec. He was describing my incident, And then I found out, in fact, his happened in 1967 at Minot Air Force Base, not F.E. Warren. A skeptic on that show did not believe Mr. Salas' story and seemed to doubt his credibility, his honesty, and his sanity. After much thought, much later, I contacted one of the guests on the show, Robert Hastings, and over time, it took me like 4 months to get up the information, and I slowly came out first anonymously, came forward first anonymously, first with my first name, then I said, what the heck? If they come after me, they come after me. Because I had the same trepidation that you did. Would I lose my pension? Would I disappear, et cetera? So here I am. This is what led to this.
Thank you, Captain.
Thank you.
I served on the Armed Services Committee as well as the Air Force Academy Board for 6 years of my 14 years in the Congress. I know the pressure that you're under. I know when you sign those things, they're like for life. So I appreciate all your courage and your service, and we all do as a body in the House of Representatives and the Senate as well. So some things they just don't know, but we're going to take it to them. Okay? Come on, Mr. Dolan.
Thank you, Madam Chair and committee. I am not a former member of the United States military, but I have devoted my life to researching the matter of UFOs and national security. What we know from research and archival work is that from the beginning of the atomic age, there have been good reports, very good reports, of unknown objects with extraordinary capabilities being in the vicinity of our most advanced nuclear facilities. They certainly appear to be interested, if not always tampering, definitely interested. We're fortunate in having obtained a few items of interest through the Freedom of Information Act. It's obvious that much remains beyond our reach, but what we have is definitely of interest. I'm going to describe a few of these cases to you, but first I want to describe an event that is not in a declassified document. It's a written account from a credible witness that really is quite fascinating. This is from a U.S. Navy officer named Byron D. Varner, who wrote a privately published book. It's called Living on the Edge, an American War Hero's Daring Feats as a Navy Fighter Pilot, Civilian Test Pilot, and CIA Mercenary. There's an interesting title for you. The book includes a UFO encounter by another Navy pilot, a man named Roland Powell. And both of these gentlemen were interviewed at length by the then head of the Mutual UFO Network, Mr. Walter Andrus. Mutual UFO Network, or MUFON, is the largest civilian UFO organization in the U.S., has been for years. So here's what happened. In July 1945, near the close of the Pacific War, the Hanford Atomic Facility, located in the state of Washington, one of the key elements of America's new nuclear infrastructure, was there. Now, although by this time no one was expecting a Japanese threat to it, as the end of the war was near, but there were still standby aircraft, armed and ready at all times, just in case anything were to happen. At noon, on a date they don't know exactly, but it was July 1945, an alert was sounded. Radar had detected a fast-moving object that was now in a holding pattern directly above the Hanford plant. It was very high. No one was able to see it at first, only on radar. 6 pilots flying Grumman F-6F Hellcats were sent up. Finally, they saw it, and they flew to intercept it. It was estimated to be about 65,000 feet. It's very, very high up. No one was able to recognize it. It had what the book described as, quote, a saucer-like appearance, bright, very fast, very high. The pilot, Roland Powell, later described this object to be as large as, quote, 3 aircraft carriers side by side, oval-shaped, very streamlined, like a stretched-out egg, and pinkish in color. He said it gave out a kind of vapor around the outside edges, he believed from portholes or vents, and he speculated that the vapor was being discharged to form a cloud as a disguise. Anyway, the pilots were baffled. They were told to go higher. They replied, if we go much higher, we're going to ruin these engines. And the answer came back, blow the engines if you have to, but use full power, full military power, full throttle injection, maximum continuous, go for it. They were then told that if the engines quit, they were to glide back toward the airport and hope that you make it. Even so, no one was able to get close enough to the object. It didn't seem to do anything. It just hovered there as if observing, staying well enough out of reach. The pilots were quite amazed at its ability to hover. Finally, some engines, according to Roland Powell, did begin to fail. Fuel consumption got critical, and the planes returned to base. After this, the craft just disappeared as quickly as it came. It did not return. They had pushed their aircraft up to 42,000 feet, which was 5,000 feet above their maximum ceiling. It was very obviously a serious event. No press coverage, as you would expect. Now, you might argue, you might quibble that this is just a story unconfirmed by government or military documents, but it was a detailed story from an experienced World War II pilot, and you can take it for what you will. We do, however, have a number of declassified government documents that describe UFOs being seen over America's nuclear facilities in the early atomic era. Several from the FBI describe a series of events over and near Los Alamos. This is, again, another central component of America's nuclear program. One of these FBI documents from January 31, 1949, and then there was another from a year and a half later in August of 1950, describe what you can only call an invasion of sensitive airspace repeatedly by unknown and extraordinary objects. So the first document gives specific dates for the initial sightings when they began in December 1948. In that month, they occurred on the 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 11th, 13th, 14th, 20th, and 28th of that month. And the witnesses were all very high caliber. We're talking special agents of OSI, airline pilots, military pilots, Los Alamos security inspectors. There was some speculation that these objects might have been Soviet, but there were no reasons offered, no evidence offered, and in fact, there's no evidence to this day. Meteorites were also ruled out in this analysis. The initial conclusion was that they were either dealing with a previous unknown natural phenomenon or something man-made, except no one seemed to know any project anywhere that could have caused these sightings. And again, after more than 60 years, we still don't. By the way, the second of those documents, referring to Los Alamos incursions, this is by August of 1950, stated that by then a total of 150 observations had been made. You think about it, 150 over that region in about a year and a half. By then, they'd been able to determine that there are 3 types of objects being seen. First was a type known as green fireballs, which were objects, this is in the words of the memo, moving at high speeds in shapes resembling half-moons, circles, and disks emitting green light. The second type was a bit more of the in-your-face variety, that is disks, round flat-shaped objects or phenomena moving at fast velocity and emitting a brilliant white light or reflected light. That's the memo. And then the third type were meteors, at which you might breathe a sigh of relief, except that the author then immediately says, Well, aerial phenomena resembling meteoric material, moving at high velocity and varying in color. The colors noted were white, amber, red, and green, so quite a range. We don't know what these objects were to this day. Another key place where the U.S. developed its atomic technologies was at Oak Ridge, Tennessee. Here's where the Manhattan Project had established a pilot plant to produce plutonium. UFOs were reported there as well. A declassified teletype from October 13, 1950, stated that the night before, an Air Force radar installation picked up 11 unknown objects, perhaps more, traveling across Oak Ridge. They were slow, low in the sky, less than 5,000 feet, maybe 1,000. Fighters were scrambled, but they saw nothing. They didn't have any explanation for this. The radar was in perfect operating condition. Everyone knew their job. That was only the beginning at Oak Ridge. An FBI teletype of December 5th, 1950, writes of 6 unidentified objects over Oak Ridge from the previous day. It's clear that people were scratching their heads. Some wondered if this was maybe a weather phenomenon. It doesn't appear to be because the sightings continued. And we get another teletype from just a few days later, December 8th, from the FBI's Richmond office. Here's a quote. This office very confidentially advised by Army Intelligence Richmond that they have been put on immediate high alert for any data whatsoever concerning flying saucers. Violations of airspace there occurred on the 15th and 16th of December 1950, and quite a few over the next few months. And recall that this is during the Korean War. If a major crisis occurring on the other side of the world, monopolizing the news and the efforts of the United States military, and yet you got a statement like this, that they want any information on flying saucers. You have to ask why. Odd craft were seen for quite some time over Oak Ridge. A fascinating document from late 1953 describes a visual sighting of a UFO seen over Oak Ridge. This is an incredible case. An F-86 fighter aircraft had just flown by, after which a black object was seen to appear out of a white cloud. It's about 12,000 to 15,000 feet altitude. It began to travel in large circles very rapidly for about 5 minutes. Sometimes it looked cigar-shaped, sometimes round. Now here, this is the report. Quote, object was extremely black in color, having an appearance of a deep black metal exterior with a fine gloss. It's quite detailed. It did not leave a vapor trail. No sound was heard. The object flew east at a tremendous speed for what appeared to be 3 miles, where it stopped. The object was then joined by 2 more of these same objects. A formation similar to a spread V was formed, and the objects at a tremendous speed flew in an eastward direction. Words fail me at this point. It's rather extraordinary. Incidentally, there's one more document describing a UFO over the Hanford nuclear plant, which I mentioned earlier. Well, we have an Air Force memo from August 8, 1950, which shows us that the Hanford facility continued to be of great interest. Let me just read this brief statement. Since 30 July 1950, objects round in form have been sighted over the Hanford AEC plant. That's Atomic Energy Commission plant. Air Force jets attempted interception with negative results. All units, including the anti-aircraft battalion, radar units, Air Force fighter squadrons, and the Federal Bureau of Investigation have been alerted for further observation. The Atomic Energy Commission states that the investigation is continuing. And by the way, there are no subsequent FOIA documents that we've gotten over what the nature of that investigation was, even though we assume it happened. So all I can say is good grief. Do you think they were taking this seriously, rather? Yes, I think they were. These are more, there are many more of these, and I'll be talking about some of those in the next panel. I think that these are more than mere accident or coincidence. Anyone charged with security over these vital installations would have to take these events very seriously. Indeed, not to do so would be a grave violation of one's sworn duty to protect and defend such installations, and it would not be hard to see why deep secrecy would dominate the subject of UFOs. There are many other incidents regarding UFOs and nuclear installations that occurred in later years. As I mentioned, I'll discuss some of them shortly in the next panel. There's even evidence that these types of events have continued to occur much more recently, although they're a little harder to confirm due to the unresponsiveness and stonewalling of affected agencies. Yet the events which took place so long ago not only demand a scientific analysis, but they also cry out to be understood for what they were, a key component in the implementation of secrecy so profound, so serious, that they contributed to the creation of a state within a state, not bound by the traditional American goals of public openness and responsiveness to the people. And one might argue such events are so serious that the public really doesn't have a need to know. Well, I beg to differ. I do think that citizens in a free republic, if they are to govern, which is the basic idea, do have a need to know about the important things in their world. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Excellent, excellent information. We're now going to open it to our members, and we're going to start with Congressman Bartlett.
As I've sat and listened to this testimony, I was asking myself a question. If, for my good, there is a cover-up of these sightings, then what else might the government do for my good? You know, this is kind of Orwellian. 1984. Mr. Dolan, what was the reference for size? Because the description of one of these was different than the description of others. It was enormous in size. What was their reference? You know, when I drive down the road and I have a little speck on my windshield, it doesn't look very big, but by golly, it can obscure my vision of a whole darn car down the road. So perception here, you know, there has to be some reference point before you really know how big something is.
Well, I certainly agree, sir. References for size are notoriously inaccurate. You get this frequently. I assume you're referring to the first incident I mentioned, the Hanford case of 1945, where the pilot said...
Well, he said it was as big as a couple aircraft carriers.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know how he came to that conclusion, to be perfectly honest with you. You do have in the research a few confirmed, and by confirmed I simply mean radar plus visual accounts of very enormous objects. It has happened. It seems incomprehensible. In this particular case, I really don't know. He simply, to his perception at that time, it looked very enormous.
The sightings that were talked about are all fairly old. What's happened more recently?
Well, I don't want to jump. If you had to say something, Robert.
Recently, let's say 2010, there was a shutdown of 50 missiles at Francis E. Warren Air Force Base. This was announced by the Air Force. It was announced that there was eventually announced there was a computer glitch. Now, I'm very wary about that. I'm not sure I believe that, but we do have witnesses that have come forward, both civilian and Air Force, that said they saw an object in the sky at the time of these shutdowns. This is still being investigated, but these incidents are still going on.
They used to be reported by the press. I don't see reports now in the public media. Do they just not report them because of the climate, the psychological climate that we're in? Or are there no sightings recently? I've seen no reports recently.
I'd just like to mention a couple of things with regard to that. It was mentioned previously, there were, in the Bentwaters panel, they talked about personnel reliability reporting, where they keep tabs on people involved with nuclear weapons and make sure they stay reliable. So this is one way the Air Force is applying pressure not to report these things, but we certainly know, and from reports we're getting from time to time, that these incidents are continuing. But that's one of the reasons I think Mr. Fenstermacher noted that some of their people were very reluctant to report what they saw. And I'm sure that had to do with the PRP program.
2 points. Since all of you have followed this activity, you know, we're not the only country that has Minuteman missiles in holes in the ground pointed at somebody. It's the somebody that we're pointing at. Did they have any, as a result of the implosion of the Soviet Union, the data that came forward and a lot of their files, do you have any knowledge as whether or not the Russians or the Soviets had a similar experience with their missiles? Anyone that wants to answer that? We'll start with Captain
I'll
Salas.
start with one that I think is in my book that I've given you a copy of. This was an incident, I think it was 1982. It was in the Soviet Union. And it was, you know, the witnesses come forward and are named, and actually I think there was an ABC special on this particular incident, but as I recall, UFO came over and actually started their missile on the launch sequence, and thankfully it was shut down from that launch sequence. But there definitely have been sightings over Soviet bases. There's a large quantity there also of incidents where UFOs were seen over missile bases.
Did they have the same effect, that is, stopping the ability of the missile to work through whatever device?
I'm not familiar with any specific case like that.
Okay. Captain Fenstermacher, did you nodded your head like you had some knowledge in that?
So the same report that Bob Salas had, I saw it on ABC, and I've read other reports, but nothing quantifiable. You know, plus if I read reports about some of the people coming forward like we have, I wouldn't necessarily believe them, you know. But I've read reports about it, and instead of knocking them offline, actually it started the launch process, which really, to me, is more worrisome.
Yeah, because they suspected us, but so either the launch sequence was interrupted, or they backed down. It was initiated. It was initiated.
Yeah.
But apparently, it's the control mechanisms that you could still start the launch sequence, but the control mechanisms were the ones that were interrupted by whatever forces were in effect. So I was just curious that, you know, if there was a focus of attention on U.S. ICBMs, obviously extraterrestrial would have an interest in the Soviet ICBMs, and also would have interest in ICBMs in the world today, not by other countries.
At the very end of the Soviet...
Richard, I was going to just come to you.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Maybe your research, you found something. This was anecdotal. Now, what did you find?
Well, in the last couple of years of the Soviet Union's existence, there was a remarkable amount of openness in the press from the Soviet military on this matter, quite a bit. It was like a window of opportunity, as people used to say at the time, and there were a number of cases. One at Kasputin Yar in 1989. I don't think that involved nuclear, but that was a rocket launch facility. There was an unknown object that appeared. It involved a jet scramble. It was quite extraordinary, very dramatic. There was a case just outside Moscow in March of 1990, which involved unbelievable encounter by an object that was playing all sorts of games with the Soviet jet interceptor, seen by multiple witnesses. The Soviet Minister of Defense spoke about it. The Soviet top general for air defense spoke about it. They both discounted that this was American. They said there's not a chance. In fact, the top Soviet commander said, there is no way we're ever going to try to attack this. It was vastly beyond anything that we or anyone we know had. So there were quite a few very dramatic cases. And there were some that involved nuclear facilities, but we don't have as much information. It's just not
good.
Much.
Thank you. My time's up.
Thank you. Congresswoman Hooley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I I have some questions just in general, and maybe we'll start with Captain Salas. These were all classified, and you took the oath that you wouldn't tell. Keep them a secret. Why are you talking now?
Thank you for asking that question. I did not speak about this for almost 30 years. I kept my oath. In 1994, I happened to pick up a book called Above Top Secret by Timothy Good. On page 301 of that book, it stated in a very short paragraph that missiles were shut down at Malmstrom Air Force Base during UFO sighting in 1967. I immediately thought that that was my incident because it described it fairly well, and I decided to go ahead and request, under the Freedom of Information Act, information about that specific incident. They were talking about the Echo flight shutdown. Because I thought that was my incident. So I didn't mention anything about UFOs when we sent the inquiry. I just asked for, actually my researcher, James Klotz, who was with MUFON at the time, requested this information under FOIA. The Air Force wrote back and said, this incident is classified, however, because of the time lapse,
right,
we're going to declassify it. And so they did. They declassified the Echo shutdown incident, and they started sending me documents. So I started speaking about it at that point because I thought at that point that that's where I was, because you have to understand all these facilities look pretty much the same. I knew I wasn't in the same squadron as Echo, but I did know that at times we did help out when they were short on crews. It wasn't until 1996 when I contacted my commander, Fred Mywald, that I realized I was at Oscar flight. And then I realized I'd been speaking out of turn, so to speak, because I had violated my oath by not speaking about my specific incident. I made a decision to continue speaking about it, and I've been speaking about it ever since. I've never been harried by the Air Force. Nobody's ever knocked on my door and said, can't talk about it. So I continue to speak about it.
Well, we're glad you do. For any one of you, I think so often when we hear the initials UFO, we always think of it as somewhere outer space, don't know, this is a huge universe, where they come from. Do you think they're UFO? Do you think they're from somewhere in outer space, or do you think these are made by some country that we, in our little universe that we know about? Tell me what you think.
Madam, these are questions that not only private researchers have been asking, but also classified researchers have been asking. When you go back through the history that we know of, back in the late 1940s when this first appeared on the scene, within the Air Force there were competing solutions to this problem. Right off the bat, you had analysts who were convinced that there was no possible way that this could have been Soviet manufactured or American, that the performance capabilities were too advanced. There were other people who did suspect the Soviet Union. In fact, during the incident over Los Alamos that I mentioned earlier, there was speculation that, wondering, could this have been a Soviet type of technology? There's just no evidence for that. We all realize that within the black budget world, there are vastly advanced types of technologies in various ways. And in many cases, NSA computing, for example, is at least 3 decades ahead of the rest of the world. At least they were in the 1960s, and they probably still are. And there are other black budget groups that have, who knows what they have. Do they have, So that's always a thing. If you were to see a perfectly hovering triangle, and there are triangular UFOs hovering above you today, you'd have to ask yourself, is this ours or theirs? This is one of the fundamental questions that serious research asks these days, because it's very difficult. I will just offer my own opinion that a large portion of these objects are not ours. And I think that's what you find when you speak with individuals within the classified world. I've been privileged to do that many, many times, some extremely prominent individuals, if I may say, and that is their opinion as well.
Thank you. I yield.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Congressman Cook, please.
Captain Fenstermacher, unlike some of the other testimony here today, you said that you didn't wait too long before you started talking about it. Am I correct in understanding that?
No, I just came forward after I saw Bob Salas.
Oh, excuse me, I misunderstood that then. And I just want to say I would commend all of you for coming out with your statements. And I certainly understand the reasons why for many, many years you may be reluctant. But had you, I thought I'd heard something that I misheard, obviously. But the reason I'm asking this is because I want to ask you all each about the Air Force project Blue Book. Blue Book was being done, there's a lot of money spent on Project Blue Book by the Air Force during, the 47 to 69 period, and some of your events occurred that you've talked about, certainly, Mr. Salas, your event, occurred while Blue Book was still being funded and written about, and Blue Book is, as I understand it, totally published now. It's out. And let me make sure I understand. I think the year of your, what you saw, witnessed,
76.
76. Yes. And again, 74, 66. So both the two captains right directly in front of me here, the things that you saw, is there any indication in Project Blue Book about those, or were you ever contacted in regards? I take it you were never contacted in regards to Project Blue Book at the time, or am I wrong on that?
No.
Or by anybody in the Air Force that was telling you that that's what they were doing. They were gathering. I realize they may take your statements, not tell you why they're taking them. And so
the only thing they did with me is shove a piece of paper in my face and told me to sign it. I never heard another word about it afterwards. In researching, I've been researching this subject for 18, 19 years now. Yeah. And recently I discovered that Project Blue Book had secret files. They had two sets of files, one available to the public and a set of secret files. And so again, I've got evidence of this. So no, when the Conant investigator came to Malmstrom Air Force Base to talk to our deputy base commander, Colonel Chase, this was a classified incident. You could not review the report. So they put it in a classified Blue Book file at the time.
Okay. And do you have any feeling of the same question, on the same question, Captain Schindele?
At the time, I knew nothing about Blue Book per se. I do recall an instance during my time at Minot where there was some discussion amongst some crew members about Blue Book. But I never knew what that was at the time until later, 40 years later, and then I find out about Blue Book, and then I find out about this article in the Saturday Evening Post, and I find out about Val Smith, who's in my squadron, and then I find out about released documents from the Air Force that mention his name. And now I understand that's where the talk about Blue Book came.
That's very likely that not too many people in the Air Force, even captains and colonels and everything else, even generals, knew that much about Blue Book. Am I right? I mean, I imagine that you've reviewed some of what's in Blue Book since. I mean, recently, for example, yes. Captain Salas, is there anything in Blue Book that's been published now that would indicate anything close to what you saw in Montana or in, let's see, it was North Dakota, Minot, or in Wyoming, or in the other? Have you looked at that? Is there any, in other words,
No, sir.
Well, okay. And do you have any of you have any feeling as to why they stopped Blue Book? Or do you have any, can you give us your opinion?
yes, sir.
Totally opinion of why Blue Book was discontinued?
Yes, Mr. Cook. I alluded to it in my statement. The Condon investigation, which was supposed to look into the UFO question for the Air Force, was a whitewash. It was intended to allow the Air Force to wash its hands of the UFO question. And I have evidence of that. The evidence that I have is the fact that Dr. Craig, who was the chief investigator for Condon, was given information about the Echo and Oscar flight shutdowns. He was given names and dates, etc., and never followed up on it. The Condon investigators never followed up on it. Robert Lowe never followed up on it. It was never mentioned, and that's because it was classified.
I would like to just answer your question very quickly. I can give you the quick lowdown on Blue Book. Blue Book was formed in 1952 as a result of a tremendous upsurge in UFO sightings that were happening at that time. That was the only time in Blue Book's history that they actually had a staff that was capable of doing investigations. They had about 12 people. Their percentage of unknowns for that year was quite high. It was almost 25%. The order came down after the CIA-sponsored Robertson panel, which was at the very end of the Truman administration, to say, that's too high. This problem is too big, and we need to knock UFOs out of the public mind. And Blue Book was then gutted and stripped of really all capabilities, and for the rest of its existence, it had no more than a staff of about 4 or 5 people with no capability and were on strict orders. This is an explicit Air Force order of 1954-55 saying you are required to get your number of unknowns down to a bare minimum. And they did that by hook or crook, didn't matter. So it became very much a kind of an open joke, to be quite frank. The Blue Book explanations were generally not considered very valid because they were not sufficiently investigated in any scientific way.
I hope the chair will allow one quick follow-up question that will take 10 seconds to answer.
Proceed, Congressman.
Okay. Is it your opinion then, Mr. Dolan, that the Air Force is more reluctant even today than they were during that period of 52 to 67 to even talk about or discuss or take information from captains and sergeants and colonels and even generals, any kind of pilots and so on, than they were then?
Absolutely, I believe that this is a complete nightmare for them to deal with.
Our final presenter before our break, our 10-minute break or so, will be Congresswoman Woolsey.
Well, I was sitting here, thank you, all 5 of you and Steve, who was there before you, you know, getting really uncomfortable about the position this has put you in all these years, and honoring you in my heart for getting past that and getting here today, and knowing that was not an easy thing to do. But I wanted to then reflect back on why is this panel, why are we all retired members of Congress? Well, you know what? We don't have a lot to lose. But it would be, this would be one of the issues that a sitting member would risk losing an election over. A 60-second, ad.
And clearance.
And clearance, yeah, into to find out data that you have to have clearance for. And but then that was the third piece of this is to me, and I feel maybe I'm being too optimistic. I think this week is going to change the feeling and respect that the common constituent, the regular member of our country, the population, the populace, I think if they pay any attention to this, they are going to have a different respect for it. And they'll be able to say it. instead of whispering to me, people who knew, I get teased a lot because I'm one of the most left progressive members that have left the House, but that was in the House. And so my constituents, they're really supportive of me, lucky me. But they would come in and they would whisper, you know, Congresswoman, I think there's something to this. And I would say, well, if it is or isn't, I'm going to go and find out why we can't find out. And they can count on, you know, that I would do that. But I'm not sure I would have done it if I was a sitting member. I have to be honest with you.
Ms. Woolsey, may I make a comment?
Yes.
For the last year, we have been sending documents, myself and Mr. Victor Bigliani of Zealand Communications, have been sending documents to Representative Peter King of New York.
Mm-hmm.
He's got all the documents. He's got my book. He knows my story, but he has not acted on it. I've also briefed Congressman Rohrabacher, congressman from California. Yeah, I think he's still in Congress. And,
yes, he is.
I briefed him, I think it was the year 2000, and he still hasn't acted on this.
Well, there's 433 other members that haven't acted also. So
Yes. I just want to point that out.
I hope that this week could make it more comfortable for them and maybe help put the pressure on our government to be more open and to stop covering up and having secret files. So I thank you very much for being here.
Thank you very much. Thank you. We're going to take a short 8-10 minute stretch or break for a moment, and when we come back, we'll conclude for the afternoon. Let's call the hearing back to order. It's been wonderful. We are into our last 50, 60 minutes of it, and it's, again, an honor to have chaired it, and all of my members who've been invited to come, we appreciate your time as well. Many have said they appreciate our time, and we think it's a mutual thing because in Congress, you can only be good at a couple things, and those are your major two committees, and you rely on others to help you get through the mirage of all of the rest of it. So this is new for many of us, and we appreciate you very much. We thought in this last hour or so that we go back to the panel first. If you have any other comments that you'd like to make, then the members will question, and then the members will have closing remarks. We'll try to make time for that, and if you'd like to make a closing remark as well, we'll do that. I'd like to start off with this session with one question for all of you, experienced men of this government and otherwise. Why do you believe today and 30, 40 years ago, the military primarily has suppressed the whole idea of what might be unidentified flying objects or extraterrestrial? And we can start anywhere, but why do you think they've done that? Never mentioned it again, act like it never happened, it didn't really happen, you know, those kinds of things. Is there something we ought to know there? Anybody got a comment on that? Sure.
First of all, I think it's the technology factor. If they do have tangible objects in hand and have learned some technology, that is a very valuable stuff.
That we don't have. Technology that we don't currently have.
That they have recovered, yes.
Oh, that they've recovered of ours.
If they have recovered UFO technology, that is very valuable stuff, and that's worth keeping a secret. The other thing is, if they were to let the general public know that they have no control over these objects, that they chase them and can't catch them, that's something they don't want the public to really know.
Those are very good. The first being that our country may have acquired some new technology that we learned from them and are now.
I have no idea.
Was that your first point? Was your point
that was
something
my
like that?
first point, if they have recovered technology.
Okay, all right. And
That
the
is
second
one
point,
reason for keeping a secret.
Yes,
The other one is, they wouldn't want the public to know that they have no control over these objects, these objects that are seemingly controlled by some kind of intelligence.
And why would they not want the public to know that we don't know what's there, or that they might be superior?
They're afraid we
Can I-
panic.
Mrs. Scott?
They're afraid that we would panic.
We as a people, we as a country?
As a country, as the world, they're afraid that Western civilization would collapse. Western religion would collapse. Your mind can go crazy on thinking the worst thing, and if you say, well, let's bring a one world government into this for a defense, well, that could prove to be a one world dictatorship also. So I can understand why the military and intelligence is keeping a lid on this until they might feel safe to let the cat out of the bag, but it's going to happen anyway.
Yeah, and those are very good points, both of those. I'm with Mrs. Hollis, and I'm going to come to you, Mr. Dolan.
Okay, I'll state the obvious as regards to my case, and that is these objects know in great detail how our missiles operate.
They know ours, but we don't know theirs.
That's right, and they can shut down our missiles at any time. They have proven that. They know in great detail how they operate, and so if you release that information to the public, what do you say then about what kind of defense do we have against these things? So.
Anyone else? Yes, sir. Well, Captain?
They could shut our missiles down until we put EMF filters on our missiles in the early 70s. And by 76, they couldn't shut them down because, in my opinion, of the EMF filters and some of the documentation that Robert Salas got unsealed, I looked at and found, in fact, in 68, after studying his shutdowns, they were looking at EMF as a problem. And I do distinctly remember our missiles being pulled offline one at a time before our incident happened, and asked one of the members of the security maintenance teams, and they let it out of the bag that it was an EMF filter, and then they got shushed for it. And I also accompanied a nuclear warhead. Our crew duty, additional duty would be to do that on a convoy where we took a nuclear warhead out to a missile site to be replaced, to swap it out. So in my opinion, that EMF filters caused a problem to these entities until they worked around that by the time in 2010 at Cheyenne, Wyoming.
I don't want to disagree with Mr. Fenstermacher, but I would like to point out that about the incident that I just mentioned in 2010. The jury's still out as to whether or not that was a UFO incident where 50 nuclear missiles were shut down while objects were seen overhead. But I certainly agree that after our incident in the early days, electromagnetic pulse or electromagnetic force was considered a possible cause for the shutdowns, and the Air Force did have an active program to improve the EMP protection.
Mr. Dolan?
Yes, I think the answers of technology and panic are probably top of the list. Certainly, if even one artifact of a UFO were ever recovered, and those who've studied this matter in detail most believe that that is the case, one can easily see why that would be of paramount interest to keep from other parties that you don't want to have that technology. So the only way to do that for sure is to deny that there's a phenomenon that exists whatsoever. But we actually know from the declassified literature that even as early as 1947, there were wind tunnel tests of disc-shaped airframes that were being conducted at Wright Field in Dayton, Ohio. And these were explicitly based on UFO sightings. We have a document from October 1947, authored by Colonel Wentworth, I believe, in which he references to this. So the obvious connection between UFO sightings alone and technological development is right there from the beginning. But the idea of panic is the worst, because what we find in many cases is that panic can escalate very quickly. 30 years ago in the lower New York State, Hudson Valley, for about 3-4 years, there were a series of unbelievably incredible sightings by thousands of people. This got the attention very quickly of national media. By 1984, the FAA quickly and clearly had what could they literally say to the world? Yes, there's these enormous boomerang-shaped objects flying over the Taconic Parkway, but don't worry, even though we don't know who they are, we don't think they're here to eat us. I mean, there's nothing that you could say, literally to the public, that would assuage their fears. In 1997, over Phoenix, we have the incident of the famous Phoenix Lights, in which Governor Fife Symington, at a press conference a few days later, brought out a big guy in an alien costume and basically threw cold water over the whole thing, ridiculed it. 10 years later, Governor Symington, at this national press conference in 2007, said, not only did we have to do that to prevent public panic, which was in danger of escalating greatly at that moment, but I myself saw the object in question, and it was unbelievable, and he offered his strong opinion. He's an experienced pilot, by the way, that this was not anything from our civilization.
I've had an opportunity to visit 3 or 4 aircraft carriers that 100 or more planes can fly off of in my defense experience. And the young men and women on ship who, nuclear submarines, I might ask, aircraft carriers as well as nuclear submarines. I've seen the nukes lined up on the submarine, I don't know, 50, 100 deep look like, in rows. We are supposedly the defense country of the world. If there's something in our atmosphere or in the world that may question that, it seems to me, this member, that we need to take a look at it. If they wanted to blow us up, seems like they'd have done it 20, 30, 40 years ago. Maybe they want to coexist. But to not even begin to, whatever, you guys got more intelligence than I have. It's just the wrong way. I mean, there won't be a world. Who wants that? Then my last one would, at this time, would be the press. The press. Very, very powerful. Do any of you know of any occasions where the press might have been, I don't know, caused to go one way or the other, positive or make joke of it or all? Captain Salas?
Thank you, Ms. Kilpatrick. In 2004, I was contacted by the Peter Jennings group, who's putting together a UFO special, and flown to Dallas, Texas for about 2 or 3 days. They interviewed me for a couple of days, got a lot of footage, said I had great testimony, and they were going to feature my testimony on their special. With a week before that special, the Peter Jennings special on UFOs was to be broadcast, I got a call saying that they wouldn't be using my interview. There are other members here of the audience that were also interviewed for this, but to me, they gave me no reason, and so I'm just suspicious that somebody got to them and did not want this story out.
Anyone else have any press? Well, before we go to the members, does anyone else at the table like to make a final statement as we go through? It may not be your final, because we're going to interact a little while longer. But if you want to add something at this point, otherwise I'll go right. Mr. Scott, Sergeant Scott.
I'd like to see the military and the local police be able to have their people, if they see a sighting or respond to a sighting, to be able to give an honest report of it. Because if it's a lie, if it's a joke, and that it's very easily to find that out quickly. And if it's not, then what we're doing is gathering more intelligence information on a possible friend out there or a possible enemy, and the more information we gather, the better it is for us. And right now, the police department, my brother's a retired policeman, they would send a rookie cop out to investigate. They didn't want to do it. They would laugh about it. But once he found out I was coming here, then he got more serious after all these years, and they told me he believed also.
Very good, thank you. Are you yearning, sir? Okay, let me then open it up to our members for our final, or we can have some dialogue for a little while. Let me start with Congressman Bartlett.
Thank you. I've been looking at some of the press clippings from yesterday's session, and the government has been quite successful in relegating this issue to the lunatic fringe. I have but one article, I have several articles, I'm going to comment on only one of them, and I really don't know where it played. It says the mock Congress hearing on aliens is heavy on real-life Mulders and not Scullys. I had no idea who Mulders and Scullys were until I read it. But apparently, in the X-Files, Agent Fox Mulder believes in all things, little green men, Roswell, men in black, whatever, and Agent Dana Scully believes in science. Scully forces Mulder to find hard evidence that there's a massive conspiracy to cover up aliens' existence. The problem with this week's alien panel, that we're an alien panel now, at the National Press Club is that any of the participating members of Congress who might naturally be a Scully have been incented to suspend their disbelief because the Citizen Hearing Foundation is paying them $20,000 plus expenses to listen to the testimony. That's just insulting that we can be bought for $20,000. That's ridiculous. Goes on to say the panelists, and they mentioned the panelists, and I'm one of the panelists, and former member Roscoe Bartlett. In an opening statement, Bartlett said he hadn't fulfilled his duty in office by failing to hold hearings on extraterrestrial. I never said that. What I'd said was that the Congress, I a part of it, had failed in its responsibility to respond to the constitutional requirement that we had a responsibility to respond to people to petition their government for a redress of grievances. It's in the First Amendment. It's very clear. I never said that I believed in extraterrestrials. I believe that there are sightings out there that cannot be easily explained away. That is one of the possible explanations of them. There may be others, but I never made that statement. Compounding the problem of eyebrow-raising testimonies that several of these politicians have reputations for being a little wacky.
What is that in? What's that?
And when it comes...
I don't know who said that.
Huh?
Who said it? Who wrote it?
I don't know. You tell me.
No. Who's it from? What network or paper?
I don't know. You know, I can't tell you. This is the article. You tell me where it came from.
It's terrible. It's terrible. Garbage.
Yeah. I want to read on. Bartlett has, this is why I'm wacky. Bartlett is warned of the dangers of an electromagnetic pulse, a theoretical nuclear blast in space that would fry electrical circuits and kill the internet. This is not theoretical. We did precisely that in 1962 over Johnston Island. It's called Starfish Prime, and it shut down we didn't have any electronics in 62. It shut down electrical equipment in Hawaii 800 miles away. The Congress set up an EMP commission. It functioned for 8 years, for 4 Congresses. It was chaired by Dr. Bill Graham, the science advisor to President Reagan. Johnny Foster was on it, the father of most of our nuclear weapons. Dr. Joan Woodard was on it. She is the deputy director at Sandia Labs. And Dr. Lowell Wood from Lawrence Livermore was on it. This is the person that Tom Clancy told me, in his view, was the smartest man hired by the U.S. government. That commission functioned for 8 years. As a result of their functioning, the Pentagon has set up a permanent commission, a permanent panel, task force on EMP. John Kyle has made a statement that says that this is one of the few, as a matter of fact, I think it's the only event I know of that could end us as a sovereign nation. You can read his comment on that. You know, I'm just insulted that the press does this. You know, these statements have no basis in reality. And I want to point out something else, how successful they've been. Here is a fact sheet that is put out by the Air Force. And it's about unidentified flying objects in Air Force Project Blue Book. They did everything they could to debunk 618 sightings, but 701 of them, they could not find any way to rationalize it away. That's a pretty large number. And then they make 2 statements. You know, one thing they say is that there was never any indication of threat to our national security. Then why in heck the classification, the secret classification, if there's no threat to our security? Those two things are just mutually exclusive, aren't they? You can't say one and then not and say the other. They said there was no evidence submitted to or discovered by the Air Force that sightings categorized as unidentified represented technology developments or principles beyond the range of modern scientific knowledge. It reminds me of Goebbels in his statement, just say it often enough, no matter how big the lie, and people will soon believe it. We have radar tracks. We have radar tracks showing that these objects, whatever they are, behave in ways that known aircraft of no country in the world can do. That just isn't true. There was no evidence indicating that sightings categorized as unidentified were extraterrestrial vehicles. That's true. But there is a lot of evidence. That they couldn't be anything that is publicized by either our country or by Russia or by China. China is now entering as a player in this domain. I'm generally a pretty quiet individual, but you know, this press stuff is just clearly outrageous. The audacity and the ignorance of something like that just infuriates me.
Thank you, Congressman. Thank you.
And then the same press that is ridiculing what we're doing today is totally silent when the Air Force puts out a fact sheet like this, that is anything but a fact sheet, because there are statements on it that are clearly not true. You know, there has to be an accountability for this, does there not? Thank you for holding this hearing. Thank you.
Thank you. Congresswoman Woolsey.
Well, I have a thought, and the thought is, once there can be disclosure about what is out there and what is coming in, and an understanding, which will take certainly hearings within the Congress and in the House and the Senate. But we have a big question, and that question is, are we doing this because we are going to arm space? And you know, let's just talk about getting rid of humanity in general. That will one more war, but it's up there in in space. We don't want to do that, and I just think this is the sneaky way to get there by not admitting that there's all of this challenge out there. And I honestly believe that the visitors, the UFOs, have shown us what they can do. I mean, they can turn off full nuclear sites, and they don't have to. That's probably why we have seen less and less recently, because they've done what, you know, if humans can't figure out what they're capable of, then they don't need to show us any other way, because they probably aren't violent, because if they did what they're capable of, they'd probably be eating some of us, you know. But they're annihilating us, yes. And we don't, you know, come on. We need to talk about this. We need to be furious at how the press is covering it, and they will. But thank you, everybody. And we've got 3 more days of this, you know, so we'll be thanking, I guess, till the cows come home here. But we've got some work to do. And our world has some work to do, not just the United States of America. So thank you, Madam Chairman.
Sure. Senator?
Well, I'm sorry I ruined his afternoon because I brought the breast stuff to his attention. It's garbage.
Your fault,
it's garbage.
huh?
But does that surprise you? I would ask one question on the Peter Jennings. Did they go on with the show?
Yes, sir, they did.
They just took you out.
They just took me out, and I
Did
think...
they have any good evidence in the show at all?
Not in my opinion.
Good. Okay, that's par for the course for mainstream media. He brought to my attention, so he's ruining my afternoon. This is the fact sheet put out by the government. There is no evidence indicating that sightings categorized as unidentified were extraterrestrial. What else could they be? There's no, I mean, and this, I think, I want to hit a couple of you on this. You know, you can say, well, we're skeptical. Sure, I'm skeptical of everything. But by the same token, if there's no other rational reason for something, you have to come to a conclusion. And the conclusion I can share with you, which is just logic, is if there's anything in this whole compendium of knowledge of UFOs, it's got to be what happened at Minot and Wyoming and so forth. What's been proven is that somebody out there, extraterrestrial, can shut off our defense capability just like that. Just like that. Now, how do you think that makes the people in Congress who are appropriating billions and billions of dollars for a defense system that doesn't work if you really push to shove? And so if there's ever a rationale for the government in cahoots with the military-industrial complex to defend the appropriation process that feeds them, it's got to be what's been discovered, and they've got to put a lid on this. I mean, this makes all this wealth obsolete. I'll give you an example. What happened recently? It happened in Alaska. You know, we've got these silos in Alaska. We've got 16 of them. And of course, nobody's proven that they work except the phony testing that's been done. Now, as soon as we had this craze with North Korea, what happened? They appropriated money for another 14 silos. That will make 13 silos to go after North Korea. And I don't know if any of you know the defense concept. It's more expensive to build a shield than to build a spear. So you build all the shields you want. All they do is have more spears to get by your shields. So this is the first thing I learned in one of the hearings on the subject. So it doesn't take, you have to go very far to realize that what we have here is the goods of why the simple rational formulation that this threatens the entire Defense Department's capability, and so deny it. It doesn't happen, it doesn't exist. Anybody talks about it, they're idiots. And so the press goes along with this, and we go back to our conclusion of yesterday. You know, I tried to conclude that we have a country ruled by juntas, military juntas in corporation, in cahoots with our corporations. But what's been raised, and I hate to monopolize it on, but maybe this afternoon is going to go too fast, but stop and think what we've concluded. That we're supposed to, now we didn't take an oath here. You took an oath, we didn't take an oath. But obviously you assume that all politicians are truthful. Well, that's a fair assumption. But let me point out to you that the hope is that we will go back to members of Congress and try to persuade them as to the knowledge that we've acquired. Well, I'm for one, will confess, I don't know anybody in the Senate that I could approach that could give me 5 minutes time on this particular subject, before or after the hearing. But what this hearing has done is not so much that it's going to persuade Congress, it's the first step to persuading the American public, or getting information out to the public.
And the world.
And that's where I think the great benefit and the contribution made with this hearing. But I just want to add one thing, and I'll follow through on it tomorrow or the day after, and that is, it's fine. We can educate the public, but does the public have any power to act on this new knowledge that they have? I don't see that. All they can do on election day is vote for people like us, who when we're there, don't pay attention to this. This is the problem we have. So I leave it at that. I was going to ask about the $20,000. They're complaining about $20,000. You know, this is 5 days, 8 hours for 5 days. You know, when the likes of these pundits go out and speak, they get $30,000 for an hour. They get $100,000 for an hour and a half. I mean, it's ridiculous that it took that this is raised by, and it was raised in an interview. Somebody raised it with me. And I says, well, what do you get paid when you're out on a stump? This was somebody from Fox. And he confessed, $25,000, $30,000 is what he gets for an hour. And we're putting in 40 hours here. So we're underpaid, if anything, but based upon the knowledge that we have. So I think we've concluded the reason for the cover-up, and that's really what we discovered today, this afternoon, was that somebody can shut off our defense just like that, and it's an embarrassment to the Air Force, it's an embarrassment to the federal government, it's an embarrassment to the Congress, and of course, nobody wants to face that embarrassment. I reserve the balance of my time in case I want to come back.
That's right, that's right. Thank you, Senator, very much. Congresswoman Hooley?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, I'd like to thank our panel. You have been terrific. And anyone that wants to jump in and answer this question is, I'm originally from North Dakota. I'm very familiar with Minot. So I have a problem with understanding why anyone would go to Minot, but I'm sorry, that's not a good thing. I love you, North Dakota. But what if wherever they come from, somebody is in Minot shutting off the missiles? Why? I mean, is that to show us that they can do that? Is that, why would you do that?
Can I try that? First of all, the world is facing a crisis right now about nuclear weapons. I don't have to remind you about those possibilities in countries that are trying to acquire nuclear weapons. We have enough, and we've had enough nuclear weapons to destroy every living thing on Earth for a long, long time.
Right.
And it would not take much to start a nuclear war, in my opinion. And that risk is getting worse. So I do believe that, and I think they are extraterrestrial, and this is just my opinion, that they are here to at least point to the fact that we are on the verge of annihilation, of suicide, if you will, our own civilization. And they would like to see us get rid of these weapons. And that's the message I got from my incident. That's my own conclusion.
Okay.
That this was strictly a message. Get rid of your weapons. Get rid of those nuclear weapons. They are not weapons of war, by the way. They're weapons of mass destruction.
Right.
They would never be used in a real war because it would just be a complete suicide for civilization, like I said.
Anyone else want to jump in? Yes. Sergeant Scott?
Yeah, in June of 2001, President Bush came on scene on ABC News, and it was carried throughout the networks and in Popular Mechanics magazine. He had with him a general from the Air Force, and he was announcing that the general was going to be the head of a new military force called the Space Force. And they were going to build this force and also put a military base on the moon. Now, nobody questioned him on why, what was the purpose for that. But then September 11th comes around, the terrorist attack comes, this general is posted as the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and the Space Force never comes about. The question I have still, why did he want to create a new military force for outer space unless there's a threat?
We have one. We have a space force. It's in existence. And it's been written about extensively. It's there.
Okay.
Good.
All right. Some acknowledge it and some don't, but that's your point's well taken, Sergeant.
Black Ops?
Black Ops is real.
Well,
Yeah, I know.
you want me to answer that?
No?
No, I won't.
No. No. Let me go to I'm sorry.
He jumped in.
Right, I'm sorry. You're absolutely right. Continue. It's your time, Congresswoman.
I'd like to hear from you.
I just said that what he's talking about is Black Ops. And I don't doubt that. But I'm concerned that they're trying to tell us. I don't quite totally agree with Bob, but I do agree with
That's
him.
okay.
I think they're at least trying to tell us that pay attention. You know, we have the power to do this. Be careful. You know, and one of my, I've got scenarios in my mind I've thought about this an awful lot. And one of my scenarios is perhaps, in fact, they've communicated with the leaders of the world and said, back off from this stuff, or else you're going to annihilate yourself. And maybe that's why we cut back some of our missiles. You know, in other scenarios, do these, I'll call them beings, do these entities, are we aware of these entities enough that they can go public instead of saying, you can't handle the truth, we can handle the truth? And going public with an innocuous thing like harmless beings that are visiting us just to keep in touch and everything's fine? Or do they consider us a species like we consider apes a species, or dolphins, or perhaps rodents, or perhaps insects? So that sort of thing I don't want to know about. If it's just the fact that they're visiting and they're trying to tell us to watch out for nuclears, they can come forward with that. The government should come forward to let us know, to ease our minds a bit. However, if it's the other scenarios, I just want them to come forward and lie to us and tell us the entities are nice beings and they just want to warn us about nuclear. I can't handle that truth, that we're insects to these people, these beings. So.
Thank you so much. Yes. David?
You've asked us to speculate. I don't know. You probably don't know.
No, I don't.
But these missiles being shut down, Captain Salas described 2 flights that he's aware of. I described to you 1 flight of 10 missiles that I'm aware of. But I'm also aware of other launch officers who've described to me similar situations. So, it's not unique that him and I have been involved here. I mean, this was a situation that was occurring quite often when I served in 1966 and 67. And who knows that it's not still happening out there. There is no active officers of any kind that will come out and admit that right now. But what I'd like to know is, what's your speculation on these missiles being shut down?
Is that rhetorical, or you need an answer?
I'd like an answer to that.
Okay, let me come back to you.
Because I'm sure it would be just as good as
that
my
might be
answer.
something to end on, too.
If I may just offer one very 30-second opinion. I feel that we really do not have enough data, even now, to know exactly why this is happening. Because despite the number of cases where this does appear to have happened, there are thousands of missiles. And not all of them have been shut down, as far as we can tell. So if they're doing this, they're obviously not doing it uniformly. And I don't really feel that any researcher has enough data to know precisely what those motivations might be. They obviously, they seem to have demonstrated superiority over our technology, that's for sure. So at discrete moments, they seem to be able to do this, but they're not doing it uniformly. And they certainly haven't stopped all of the massive wars that have, run over the planet. So there are certain limits as to what they're willing to do as well.
Thank you, and I yield back my time, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Congressman Cook?
Thank you. From the things that you've described today, you all must have done what Captain Fenstermacher just indicated he has done, and that's think about these things a lot during the times when you didn't say too much anything publicly, and after you've come out and started speaking, which again, I congratulate the two of you that have done that today for, I understand, the first time. So I think, I've got to say, I think your speculations are a lot more informed than what our speculations might be on this. So I'd like to start with Captain Salas, and each of you have also said, I think, if I'm wrong on this, correct me, but that you all complied as you were asked to do and required to do with the non-disclosure statements almost immediately after you described to your seniors in the military what you had just witnessed. Am I correct on that?
Yes, sir.
You didn't.
See, I was involved in 3 sightings, 3 different bases, and not one time did I have to sign anything away.
Okay, Sergeant Scott, I appreciate that clarification. But I'm right. For example, let's start with Captain Salas. You signed those.
Absolutely, sir.
Okay, so
non-disclosure statement.
Absolutely, and I think your reasons that you might give this committee, this panel, as to both legitimate reasons why you might have been thinking over the years or at the time that the Air Force might have asked you to do that, and the illegitimate reasons why they might have asked you to do that. You must have some idea on both sides of this. Why did they make you come in and sign that right off the bat? I mean, and why were you then here? The whole culture was, don't talk about it or you're going to be in trouble. What were the legitimate reasons for that, if any, or illegitimate reasons for that, if any?
I think I discovered the main reason, and that is this on? Okay. That the Conant investigation was ongoing at the time. And the idea of the Conant investigation basically was to give the Air Force a way out of investigating UFOs. And if they had allowed me to speak to the Conant investigator about my incident, and Mr. Fiegel and Mr. Mywald and Mr. Carlson, they would have discovered that this was really a serious problem. And so that, I think, was the primary reason they were so anxious to get us to sign these non-disclosure statements at the time.
But that can also be very illegitimate. Am I right? I'm talking about from the Air Force's standpoint.
Well, if they were honest about this, that would have been illegitimate.
And my question is, what should they have done, and what should we start insisting the Air Force do?
They should have been honest about it. They should have
couldn't agree
been
more with
straightforward
honesty.
about it and let the people handle it. This belongs with the people. The people should decide something of this import, and not a small group of individuals in and out of government, which is what is going on right now. There is a small group of individuals inside government and outside government that are controlling this phenomenon. They're controlling the technology, they're controlling what's said about it, they're spreading disinformation about it, they are controlling the press, I think. And that's how they're keeping the ridicule factor going.
Well, 1967 or 66, during your experience, that's 45 years ago. 46 years ago.
Yes, sir.
Mm-hmm. Why aren't they releasing some of these statements by now, if you have any reasons for it? I mean, I just want to, I want to understand this as best I can. There's no way to pry open a can unless you have the right tools to pry it open with.
If you just want my opinion, I'll be glad to.
Yes, well, that's what I'm asking. I want to know anybody
opinion.
else's opinion if you have one.
I do think it's about power and greed. It is not about concern for public safety. That window passed a long time ago. But right now, because they have discovered so much about how of the technology and many other things regarding to this phenomenon, including paranormal subjects like telepathic thought, things like that, which are part of this phenomenon. We didn't talk about it, but it is part of the phenomenon. And the abductions that are going on, another part of this phenomenon. This is such a complex thing that these secrets are so powerful that the men controlling this, men and women that are controlling this, I think the main motivation is power and greed.
Captain Fenstermacher, we're going to ask you this then. You made the comments about the filters, and I don't know all the technical terms, but I was quite interested. The timing of those filters coming on to protect nuclear installations, and that was in the 70s, you say? Well,
74, 75.
I would ask Captain Schindele and Captain Salas, then, isn't it likely or not that what you said to them, they believed you because they started building technologies to protect against the very thing you were witnessing about? Am I right on that?
Well, sir, as Mr. Bartlett pointed out, it was well known that nuclear explosions produce electromagnetic pulse.
But they don't just appear to the point where you need filters for the silos. Well, go ahead. Excuse me, I didn't mean to.
There was a bench test done at Boeing on the logic coupler, and it was shown in this bench test that at a certain frequency of EMP injected into the logic coupler that the coupler would be disabled. So they had that evidence. And so there's no doubt in my mind that one reason they tried to protect the missiles from EMP was nuclear explosions, but the other was as a result of the incident that I just described, to help protect against UFO disabling them, the missiles.
But of course, they knew
but
that.
Whether or not it was successful is another question.
Okay.
Gentlemen, would you yield for just a moment?
Certainly.
I just wanted to make an observation about that. We have, using these bench test facilities, several times noted deficiencies in our ballistic missile system, and we have corrected those. The last time we tested and the last time that we found deficiencies and fixed them, we never tested. We don't know whether they're fixed or not, but neither do the Russians. And so there's that big question, and that's how we left it. They aren't so sure what they'll work. We aren't dead sure they will work, but if there's any question about whether they will work or not, the mad philosophy still is operative, isn't it?
Oh, okay, I appreciate that. And also just wanted to quickly ask then, so it's a little bit unclear in your mind, Captain Salas, Captain Schindele, that these filters that came in the 70s that were described here today, that they could have been brought forth by the Air Force because they were finally getting to something they felt had occurred as early as or that they knew about as early as the 1950s, or something they might have experienced from the testimony. It could have also been what you had told them. Either one, maybe. Or is that? Yeah, well, and I know I'm kind of into the weeds on this a little bit, and I apologize for that, but I just wanted to know whether, I mean, it really struck me when I heard Captain Fenstermacher talk about the shields and the filters, that they had to have believed your testimonies and what you said you saw that day. They had to know that something was definitely happening, and then to keep this silent for 46 years, as we've talked about. You know, I wasn't sure about this whole truth embargo even a few days ago, but this truth embargo indeed needs to start coming down.
document that Bob Salas had released was very lengthy, really with 3 sub-documents, and I spent a lot of time scanning it. And in fact, there was a little piece about UFOs. What it was a technical explanation of all the echo sites and what happened at each of the sites in the first document. And there's a little piece about UFOs, and it said, the rumor of any UFO creating this is disapproved, disowned, I think was the word.
Disproven. The rumor was disproven. Now, I don't know how you disprove a rumor.
Yeah. But at the very end document, it was a 68 document where they talked about they were concerned with how EMF affected it and that Boeing was going to work on the EMF problem. And I think what we installed was the result of his Echo and Oscar flight and not his testimony, because it didn't happen. They didn't believe him, but
No,
the technical...
just because they said they didn't believe him doesn't mean they didn't believe him.
Well, yeah, but the technical aspects, they couldn't say didn't happen, because Echo flight had all these errors, and this is what happened.
I think you're being very humble, Mr. Captain Salas. You probably, and all of you, because you probably create a lot more technology than you believe, or that you even are willing to talk about.
Thank you very much, Congressman. Congressman Bartlett, did you have another comment you'd like to make? Did you have another comment?
Yes, thank you very much. I wanted to make a comment about the ballistic missile defense that the Senator Gravel was talking about. He's correct. Our major ballistic missile defense is in Alaska. It will intercept missiles coming over the pole. Most of our potential enemies, the shortest route to get here is over the pole. In my judgment, I hope it will never be used, because the only time I think that it would be used is when the Russians, if they were to launch, and it would be very quickly swamped. They have thousands of missiles. If we're lucky, we'd take out the first half dozen or so, and that's it. This system is really made to defend against countries like North Korea and Iran. These people may be evil. They are not idiots. They will not launch from their soil. I have no idea why we're waiting until they develop an intercontinental ballistic missile which will reach us. They know that we will know from where it was launched, and they know that within about 30 minutes they will be vaporized, the whole darn country. They're a huge threat. But the launch will not come from their soil. It will come from somewhere in the ocean. We have big coastlines, essentially totally unprotected, and they will not be protected. Even if we decide we need to protect them, they'll not be protected for years. And that's where the real threat comes from. And I think that the monies we have spent on our ballistic missile defense in Alaska are wasted monies, because we cannot protect ourselves against Russia. In my judgment, they're the only country that would ever come over the pole. Because if you have 100 weapons coming over, you know darn well where it came from. No one else has that many. So you know very well where it came from. It came from Russia. So they have no reason not to come over the pole. No one else has very many weapons, and they're not going to launch from their soil, because they know that, with our triad, with our submarines and so forth, they know that within about 30 minutes we would vaporize them. Do you think they would do that? That they're a huge threat, but it's from the ocean. It is not from their soil. Thank you.
Thank you. That was rhetorical. You don't feel compelled. Okay. Let me get up. Sir, Senator has also want to make a final comment. Senator?
Oh, no. I want to follow through with that. Captain, you made a challenge to us to respond. Would you repeat that challenge?
Well, you asked us to speculate on the reason.
No, you were asking us something that
Well, I asked you right back. What's your speculation?
Well, here, you were wondering whether or not we have forces in space. What do you think that all of these weapons are, ICBMs in Alaska, are about? Do you think they're about Korea? He's mentioned possibly Russia. They're not about Russia. We can, with our submarines, hold, one submarine can hold, which has got over 250 warheads, we can hold any people in the world hostage. Did you not notice a year ago, it's within a year, that the United States had a satellite and we let it come to Earth, and before it came into the atmosphere, we shot it down to make a demonstration that we have the capability of shooting down satellites in outer space. Do you recall that? Okay. Do you recall that 6 months later, the Chinese did the same thing to tell us tit for tat, you can do it, we can do it too. And what country, and of course, the amount of money we're spending to weaponize outer space is a supreme idiocy of the American government. Because we are the most vulnerable. If you talk to any scientist, any explosion in outer space, who's got the most satellites? I mean, you'd wipe out our whole communication system. You'd wipe out our economy. We're all dependent on satellites. So this is the kind of leadership and the appropriations that go forward in this idiocy. And now when you talk about, you get a president of the United States when we cut back, 100 nukes, and the Russians cut back 100 nukes, and we're breaking each other's arms, patting each other on the back. Just think of the insanity of targeting Russia and China today. Our banker is China. Russia, all they want to do is sell gas and oil to Europe so they can live well. And so it leaves you with the question mark, and this goes back to maybe and I'll end on this. You can be suspicious of what we don't know. But what we do know is so horrifying that you don't have any room for suspicion. It's a fact. And thank you very much for your testimony. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I'm going to take the prerogative of the chair and just thank you all once again. We've had a wonderful day from bent waters to nuclear and all that you've done. Tomorrow promises to be the day 3 with Roswell and others we are anticipating. We have thoroughly enjoyed you as presenters, as an audience on the subject. I don't think we can solve it all tonight. You guys are light years ahead of most of us on it. But do know that you have our ear and that we look forward to working with you. Just know that your written testimony will become part of our permanent document, and this committee is adjourned.